Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. My name is Scott. I'm the program coordinator with Project Excite. It looks like we've got a few people on, and then we might have some more sort of filter in once we get started. I want to thank you all for joining us for one of probably our 10th or 12th Xplore workshop. Today we brought in someone really great. His name is Jamie Van Leeuwen. He currently serves as the Director of Youth and Community Engagement with the Emerson Collective, which focuses on social justice issues specific to education, conservation, immigration, healthcare, and youth development. Prior to this, he served as a public sector leader to Mayor and then Governor John Hickenlooper for 14 years. And he is the CEO and founder of the Global Livingston Institute, a NGO based out of East Africa that's focusing on developing innovative solutions to poverty. And with that, I'll pass it off to Jamie. But just to let you guys all know how this is going to work, Jamie's going to give us a little bit of a talk for 20 or 30 minutes, and then just write all your questions, and we'll be able to sort of ask them in the latter half of our hour. So with that being said, Jamie, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you so much for doing this with us and joining us.
Great, Scott. Well, thank you for having me. Scott, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Just want to make sure that our sound test hasn't failed us since I saw you last. Well, obviously, I'm Jamie, and I have had the pleasure of actually working with the University of Denver and connecting with students from the University of Denver for almost 15 years now. My first adventures at the University of Denver was when I was a street outreach worker. I was running the street outreach programs for Urban Peak, which is a homeless and runaway youth shelter in one of your neighbors over off of 16th and Tacoma, still there. And we started figuring out how to get kids off the streets, and we started figuring out how to house kids and provide them with access to treatment and services. And the University of Denver played a huge role in helping us deliver those services through your School of Social Work and interns and support from the community. Obviously, I went on to run the homeless initiative for Mayor Hickenlooper called Denver's Road Home. And again, the University of Denver really stepped up and was part of our Homeless Connect efforts, where when we were trying to connect the community with homeless and connect the homeless with services, the University of Denver ended up being a host for one of our experiences, where thousands of community leaders and students came together to invite the homeless to be their guests at the arena, the Magnus Arena, and we set up a series of services where students and business leaders help connect the homeless that day with access to IDs and birth certificates and housing lists, and set up a court through the city and county of Denver, and did a lot of really cool services. So the long of that is that University of Denver has a long legacy of really connecting with community development issues. During my time with Mayor Hickenlooper, I also I had a fellowship through the Bonfils Stanton Foundation, which is a local foundation in the Denver community that a lot of you have probably heard of. And the Bonfils Stanton community or foundation had started this fellowship when I was 26, 27 years old, just finishing my time at Urban Peak, around creating an opportunity for young leaders to engage in professional development opportunities who are in the nonprofit world. And in the nonprofit world, one of their board members, a man by the name of John Livingston, had said, hey, look, in the private sector, if you want to incentivize your leadership, you can send them to Harvard, you can incentivize them through a lot of different means that the nonprofit community just doesn't have the resources to do. So we created those resources, and we each got a fellowship grant to do whatever we needed to do to kind of turbo boost our leadership roles in the nonprofit community. And so I used it to finish my PhD in public policy at the University of Colorado, Denver. I know, not the right university, but close enough. I used it to connect with the business community through the Chamber of Commerce and a number of different programming opportunities that they had available, so I could learn how to build public-private partnerships. And then I used it to really engage on better understanding youth poverty on an international level. And I went and spent a lot of time kind of moving around the country. I went to Beijing and took the Trans-Siberian Rail and presented a paper in China and learned about poverty on that front. I went to Lesotho and Swaziland and South Africa and learned about youth poverty on that front. And the tail end of my PhD, I had heard this piece on NPR about how they were reintegrating the child soldiers into northern Uganda. And I was really curious how folks were doing that. How do you take a kid who was a victim, who at the age of 10 or 12 years old was taken out of their mother's home or their school or their church, and then forced into captivity, and then became perpetrators that went back to their communities and they did horrible things? How do you actually reintegrate those young people back into the community and have them have any sort of a semblance of a normal life? And I thought about how hard it was to take a homeless person and push and reintegrate them back in the community. How do you do it with a child soldier or a former child soldier? And so I went to Kampala, and my first trip to Uganda was in 2007. And I really fell in love with what was happening in the communities there. There was a great spirit of collaboration and wanting to fix things, but not a lot of resources to do that. So spent some time in Kampala, and I went up to the north and I saw where the former child soldiers were being rehabilitated. And I learned this unbelievably interesting life lesson about community development there. There was a woman who was running a jungle clinic, and her name's Sister Jovita. She's still in northern Uganda, and she had this unbelievable center that she had set up in the middle of nowhere, and there were women and children lined out of her clinic waiting for services, women who had babies who had malaria, women who were being impacted by HIV, and people who were very sick. And it seems like it'd be a place that was pretty hopeless, and it wasn't. This woman had this laugh that was larger than life, and she was walking around and she was providing all these services, and she took me to her medical clinic and the pharmacy where she had all of her medicine. The shelves were bare, and I made my first bold promise to Africa. I looked at Sister Javid and I said, Sister, I said, if you don't worry, I will come back and I will fill these shelves with medicine. And I was 26 years old, and I was going to fix Africa, and I made this important promise to her, and she looked at me and she laughed. She's like, that's fine. She's like, that'd be great if you could do that, but if you don't, we'll be okay. And there was this moment, this lightning bolt of community development that over the years has become such an integral part of the work that we do with the Global Livingston Institute, was that notion that Africa doesn't really need us, that they would love to work with us and they would like to build partnerships with us, but this idea that some 26-year-old white gangly dude's going to go and fix Sister Jovita's jungle clinic when she's doing a perfectly amazing job of doing it with very few resources and quite exceptional at the role she's playing, that we should get over this notion that we're kind of superheroes, and really move into that place of what role can we play to work together, because they do want to partner with us. And there's a lot that they can learn from us, and there's a lot that we can learn from them. And so that was kind of the way that the trip kind of developed for me. I went to southern Uganda and saw where rural community development was taking place around a lake called Lake Binyoni, which is where we ended up building our first and only site that we developed. And then I went into Rwanda, where you see where the rare mountain gorillas are creating the conservation movement and the nature, and the gorillas are actually creating jobs and opportunities for people to move them out of poverty, and then ended up in Kigali, where you see what happens when you genocide a third of your population, and what it means to rebuild a country. And I learned a lot during that trip, and I remember turning to my colleague who was running a grassroots organization called Come Let's Dance, and I said, Shay, I'm doing a lot with domestic poverty. I really should help here and do something here in East Africa. And she looked at me, and my second bold promise to Africa fell flat as well. And she said, hey, don't do anything here. She said, this place is filled with nonprofits that show up wanting to build schools and ship laptops and build medical clinics. And they show up here to fix things without ever really getting to know the community. And she said, if you really want to do something in East Africa, if you really want to do something in international development, you need to listen and think with the communities before you come and try to fix something. And it was interesting that those two tenets, or those two experiences during that trip, really define the work that we're doing right now with the Global Livingston Institute. And it's really how the Global Livingston Institute was born. In 2009, a family that's actually very dear to the University of Denver, the Mortgage Family Foundation, provided some funding for for us to launch our first international experience in East Africa. And we took a group of 19 students from the University of Denver to participate in that same experience that I participated in. And it was a great opportunity for us to take a different approach to community development, that instead of putting together a group of students to go and landscape or to volunteer or to spend time working on something, we said, hey, none of those things are actually really going to fix the communities that we're in, and actually they just take a lot of people's time. What we'd really like to do is actually spend time really getting to know the community and understanding what their issues are, and a little bit less time trying to fix things that we assume people need fixing. And that was the beginning of the curriculum that the Global Livingston Institute 10 years later is teaching to the hundreds of students that we take. 10 years later, we've taken over 2,000 scholars and community leaders from around the United States to participate in our programming. And it's really defined around that whole notion of listen, think, act. There's a Western concept that's burned into our brains when we're young, around that whole idea of don't just stand there, do something, that we should fix things. So don't just waste your time, go do something. And what Africa is saying is don't just do something, but stand there. And loads of people kind of show up all the time with new ideas and things that they think will work because of their own perspectives and their own values and their own places where they live. And Africa is saying, hey, you should ask us what we want before you come here and just assume that we want you to build something or fix something. And so we've built this really robust international research institute based on those principles. We have 32 academic partners. The University of Denver is one of them. We're always engaging and looking for youth to participate in our programming. We always have great interns from across the schools at the University of Denver. We've worked with the business school to help us build out our social impact initiatives and our entrepreneurship programs. We've worked with social work school to help us with our music festivals. We have one of the largest music festivals in East Africa right now, where every year we connect thousands of young people and women in rural communities with access to HIV testing, reproductive health services, cervical cancer screening. And all that was built around really engaging with the community that said, hey, if you want to engage with us and you want to build a music festival, or you want to do something community development oriented, bring music to our communities, especially in the rural communities where you can have a captive audience, and rural communities that never get access to a cool concert or to Ugandan rappers or headliners. If you want to bring those people, that'd be great. And then as long as you're going to bring those folks there, allow our public health officials in the local communities to provide access to healthcare and services. And so that's how we really built out some of our public health work that we're doing across the country, both in Uganda and Rwanda. Was not from us coming and saying, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did a music festival and we tested thousands of youth and women for HIV? It was the communities that taught us that this would be a great vehicle for us to actually connect them with those services. And it's turned into the largest music festival, as I said. And we have about 15 to 20,000 people per show up. We one of the Stealth from the Lumineers has joined us. Those of you who know Colorado music, Johnny Five and the Flowbots have come with us. In February of last year, Michael Franti came with us. And so it's created a great way for US artists to really connect with communities and better understand community development, but more importantly for the communities to really benefit from how to do really good local community partner development in partnership with US-based organizations. So we've created that. We have an unbelievably interesting workforce development initiative that we've launched, where we went back to Leeuwen, where the former child soldiers were, and in partnership with Cornell, again, rather than going and looking at all these kids and saying, oh my God, you are back in the community, therefore we should build you a school. We went back and said, hey, who are you? What do you need? And what's that about? And ended up spending a couple of years really getting to know the young people. We write a lot about the child soldiers when they're in captivity and all the terrible things that happen. We don't write a lot about what happens when they come home. And how they reconnect, or what they need to reconnect to their communities. And what we learned was they didn't really want us to build them a school, and they didn't really want us to ship laptops or build them a medical clinic. What they said is they really wanted job training skills, that they wanted to go to work, that many of them were 18, 19 years old. And so their time of being in a K through 12 school had probably passed, and they're much more interested in developing skills that would help them pay their bills and take care of their families. And so that led us to a workforce development initiative that today, even during the COVID crisis, we have about 200, mostly women, farming in northern Uganda and working on ways to connect with the community there. Our academic partners, rather than going and helping them farm, because they don't really need student interns to come and help them farm, but what they do need is help trying to figure out the supply chains and how to get their food into the marketplace and to be as effective as possible on that front. And so we've been able to engineer a really great partnership with the local community. There's an organization called Children of Peace Uganda that works with us to connect those farmers with access to the marketplace. And so what we've learned a lot along the ways is that, poverty is so contextual, and as you all are learning and looking at your own career routes and ways to develop access to programming and services, community development is complicated, but it is all rooted really in really engaging with the local community. We learn a lot from the workforce development initiatives we're doing. We learn a lot from the music festivals that we're doing. We have a women's leadership summit that we do every year where we're able to engage women from all around Uganda and East Africa with women from around the globe who come together to tell stories and to share leadership experiences, to empower them and to build their networks. And all of it is really about creating a seat at the table. How do you create a seat at the table for people who don't have a seat at the table? Most people don't want you to make decisions for them any more than you want people making decisions for you. We tend to be very happy when we get to a place where we don't need our parents to tell us everything that we need, and we want to provide those for ourselves. People in other communities are the same. They don't want people to give them things or feel sorry for them or feel bad for them. They want to be empowered to be able to make their own decisions for their families. They don't need somebody to build them a school. They want to be able to pick where they send their kid to school. They don't want somebody to tell them what kind of healthcare they need. They want to be able to afford to be able to pay for their own healthcare or access it. And so we really try to build our approach to the community development work that we do, and really trying to inculcate that model of really genuine community empowerment versus a more colonial approach that I think some of our nonprofits have taken in the past, where it's coming and telling a community what they need and how they're going to deliver those services. So 10 years later, we are having the time of our lives. We have a great team. We're mostly Ugandan run. We have about 40 full-time Ugandan staff. We have about 6 full-time US-based staff. And they're all working together right now during the COVID crisis. Both Uganda and Rwanda are shut down, but our teams are busier than ever. So rather than having summer programming this year, because obviously it's not an easy time to fly or travel anywhere on the planet. So the summer programming that we usually build out for students, when I would actually be pitching to you all that you should come and visit us in Uganda this summer, I will tell you that you should come and join one of our research experiences or internship opportunities at some point. But in the meantime, they're working on the folks who are on the lake in southern Uganda at the center of the research institute that we built. They are currently working to connect those families with access to services. With Uganda being on lockdown, people who are needing access to healthcare don't have traditional transportation routes. So our boats and our transportation networks, we've gotten permission from the Ugandan government to be able to transport those people to emergency healthcare services. And that wasn't, again, us saying, hey, Ugandan staff, maybe we should help people get to the hospital. They're the ones who said, hey, we're going to use our boats to kind of refit and reduce or reinvent our work right now during a period of enormous crisis for the communities that we're working in. So they're working on that right now. We've just launched, which may be of interest to you, we've just launched a global fellowship program that we know that there's a number of students and young people who need internships and are very interested in international issues. And so over the course of the summer, we actually have almost filled all 50 spots for the first phase. I think we're going to open up a second phase in July and August, where students will still get the opportunity to travel virtually to Africa and spend time with us in Uganda. They'll spend time in Kampala. They'll spend time connecting with the former child soldiers. They'll spend time in the South, connecting with our Intussy team on the lake and the work that they're doing around rural community development. And then we'll put them to work through a series of internship and research opportunities that we need some help with. That's going to help inform some of the community development work that our teams are engaging and executing in East Africa. So that's a little flavor for kind of the work that we've done with the Global Livingston Institute. I expect it will continue to grow. We obviously started with one academic partnership, which was the University of Denver. We now have 32. We've taken thousands of young people and scholars and philanthropists and community leaders and musicians and artists to East Africa. And we're really excited as we continue to grow. We learn a lot from both the communities we work in over there, but also the students and the folks who participate in our programming from the United States, who always have new ideas and ways for us to innovate and approach the work that we're doing. So on that note, before I can keep going, but I think I shared a video with you all that will kind of give you some context and some visuals to kind of what we're about, and I'll let you watch that on your own time. You're more than welcome to ask me questions after you see that, or let us know how you want to get involved. But I guess, Scott, at this point, if there's questions, I'm happy to field questions about the work I've done either internationally or domestically, or thoughts or comments that folks have who are listening in today that are helpful to you all as you're kind of thinking about your own career work. I'm happy to field those while we have some time together.
Yeah. Well, Jamie, thank you so much. As I've sat through this presentation before, and it's just always incredible to see the work that you're doing and to share that story with, especially DU students. It's always really great.
I make the same jokes every time, Scott. I'm sorry. So
the worst part is they land every time, Jamie. So I really just I can't tell you anything there.
It's really hard to do virtually. You can't tell if people are actually falling asleep when you're talking. When I'm in a class, at least I know when I'm putting students to sleep. Here it's like I can't really tell what's going on. So anyway, but let me know what questions you guys have.
Yeah, well, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to send them either through the Q&A functionality, or you can just sort of chat and we'll all be able to see them. But I'll sort of get it started off because obviously Project Excite is focused on entrepreneurship and more recently in the last few years, expanding the sort of growth of social impact companies. And so as someone who works in an NGO, but also has worked in private business, it sounds like, what do you sort of think is the best mentality for a social impact business founder to sort of think when they're going into communities that they may not necessarily be a part of, but want to help sort of improve and make better?
Right. You know, it's such a new field right now that's evolving, and everybody kind of talks about social impact investing right now, and it's kind of the buzzword, and people are really engaged in it. I think that for entrepreneurs, you know, about 3 or 4 years ago, we started a social impact company called Staffable. From actually one of the former student from the University of Denver helped us launch it. And I think what's so interesting about it is that I ended up talking to the former head of GM for Africa and the Middle East. His nephew was a friend of mine. And so I talked to him. I was like, hey, are we crazy to do this work in Africa? And he said, absolutely not. And he's like, it's the last vestiges of the Wild West, the kind of the social impact investing arena. He said, you just have to be prepared for turbulence. He said that if you're going into this and you think everything's going to work perfectly, you'll be disappointed. And so he said, you know, buckle your seatbelt because it's not for the faint of heart. And I think that was really good advice. I think going into social impact work right now, especially in developing countries, even when you do listen and think and then act, it's an iterative process. And even when you think you've done all the listening and thinking you needed to do, when you act, you usually have to go back and say, okay, now I'm going to go and figure this piece out and listen and think again and then act. And it doesn't usually happen. I mean, some people get really lucky and strike it rich and kind of figure out the mechanism early on, but that's not usually the case. And so I think that going into those countries, one, I think it's going into it with the patience and the humility to get to know the community and the context before you assume that your social entrepreneurial idea is the greatest one on the planet. Test it out, do your focus groups, ask anybody who's willing to listen what they think, ask the shopkeeper, ask your taxi driver, get to know folks and see what they say and be open to hearing what they have to say. and then see where it takes you, because sometimes those roads don't necessarily lead to the places that we think they're going to take us. So I think it's being open to those and being creative about it. So
Yeah, well, awesome. So we've got another question. I'm in a class about social enterprises. Was there a pilot process for the retreat center? And if so, what was that like?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're turning the mirror inward on me here. And, actually, there would have been a more extensive pilot process if I had this to do 6 years later. But one of the things that we did do when we started it, when we were kind of starting to think about building and whatnot, is that people used to, when you see the pictures of Intusi, you'll see a few on the video, people would get in their dugout canoes and row around the lake. This is a very rural region in Uganda. It's absolutely stunning. So you're crazy not to come visit us. But we'd go around and you'd see these people coming around. And there's a women's association around the lake that formed, not because I said we should have a cool women's association. They existed long before I was there, and they'll exist long after I am gone off this earth. But it's a very powerful group of women. And as we were starting to engage with the community, the Women's Association said, well, if you need advice or help, or you want this to be successful, you should ask us questions. And so we did. And the Women's Association has been an unbelievably great thought partner. They're involved not only with, they weren't just involved with the development of Intusi, but they said, hey, if you're going to come here, we sure would like it if you engaged us as meaningful partners. And they love to perform. So they perform for community. They have an arts, they've written songs, they have a product that they create. They've actually become some of our local farmers. So their expectation was, if you want us to be partners and you want us to help, then you've got to actually reciprocate. Like, we want to, and don't do a meaningful, hey, we'll come and dance for you kind of thing. It's like, no, we want to be partners. Like, you need to pay us to be part of this, to be part of your operations. And if you're really committed to this community, then show us that. And so, and in exchange, they've helped us figure out things. So anytime we introduce something new, or we introduce a new program or a new idea, they're some of the first people we go to say, well, what do you guys think? And they're not afraid to tell us what they think. They're very powerful, smart women. And so anyway, it's been a great piece. But I appreciate you bringing it up, because I think that those kind of pilot conversations, whenever you do anything, I think we get these ideas that we're so excited about, and you get some funding behind them, and it's like, okay, we're off to the races. And we tend to forget to sit down and ask some people, hey, I want to do this. There's a lot that people will tell you that you don't know if you just take a little bit of time. It could actually help you avoid making some pretty crazy mistakes. And so, and I think that even as an organization, we're 10 years old, and I feel like I've been doing this for a long time, and sometimes I feel very smart about community development, and sometimes I'm like, gosh, we totally missed that one. And you will, like, even when you're very aware of it, it's hard work. And going back to your question at the beginning, Scott, when people talk about social entrepreneurship, I think that people who go into it thinking that this is kind of a short term, I can go to Africa for 2 weeks and invest and make this work, are crazy. Like, it takes a lot of time. You have to roll up your sleeves, and it's not glamorous in these days where it's like, oh my God, this isn't fun at all. But the rewards are that you're building these relationships. And if you think about anything that you've done that is meaningful, I'm a marathon runner. Mile 18 is not fun. It's not supposed to be fun. And I've run a ton of marathons, and to this very day, mile 18 sucks. It just is. And you know that in order to do something spectacular or big or accomplish something, it takes the mile 18s to get you across the finish line. And so anyway.
Yeah. Well, this is more of a personal question, building off of what you were just talking about. But as a white man, what sort of barriers have you come into trying to do some of this more social impact style work in different communities, and how have you overcome them?
Sure. I mean, the biggest overcoming, I'm not just a white man, but I'm a white man of privilege. I grew up in a very privileged lifestyle. I never had to worry about where my parents are going to feed us, or if they're going to come home at night, or what that looked like. And so I'm really fortunate to have all those things. And then it's really easy to go into these things with that value, it's impossible to not have that subjective experience because they're my own experiences. And so you have to be very aware of those. And again, I'll make the same comment. We make mistakes all the time as an organization, as a community development organization. I make mistakes all the time as a white male. I have views and lenses and perspectives that are just my own views and lenses and perspectives, and they're not. And until you actually take the time to really roll up your sleeves and connect with folks who have different experiences and different. And even when you do that, I can't. When I always talk to the students when we connect with people in the slums. I've been working with the poorest of the poor most of my life. That's all I want to do. It's all I'll ever do. And I've spent an enormous amount of time with the poorest of the poor. I have no idea what it means to be the poorest of the poor. I've never, the whole notion of spending some time in the slums and you know what it's like to be poor. All you know what it is like is to be fabulously, incomprehensibly bloated with wealth, is what one of my favorite authors from Blue Clay People quotes. It's like, I have my own perspectives. And so what you can do is be aware of those so that when you're making decisions, you're aware of your cultural biases that you bring to the table. And that serves you. It allows you to do better work than if you don't, but it still makes it complicated. And it's a great question. I think it's important for us to think about all the different biases and perspectives we bring in. And again, halfway through a project, I'll think I've got it, and I'll think that I'm paying attention to the right things. I'll be like, no, but you missed that part of it. So know that it's complicated. It's hard to do. It's not to say you shouldn't do it, but being aware with it and being aware of that, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've got another question from one of the participants. What do funders and donors say for the reasons why they choose to invest and give to GLI?
Oh, it's a great question. Oh, good. What do funders and donors say? I think that with any kind of community development organization or nonprofit organization, everybody has their own reason for giving. I think that the connectivity that people have with the Global Livingston Institute is we tend to attract more of a little bit more of a non-traditional donor. We're, just to give you a sense of our funding, we're about a $1.4 million organization. We just put our annual report on that actually tells the story of the last 10 years if you're inclined to read a cool annual report, if there is such a thing. But about half of that comes from revenue that we generate through the programs that we run, so that we've tried to be as sustainable of an organization as possible. We're not spending all of our time fundraising. About a quarter of that to probably closer to 30% of it comes from individual donations, contributions, and whatnot, and then another 20% from grant funds and whatnot. So our donors tend to be the people who have really touched and felt and experienced the Global Livingston Institute, either through the eyes of a student who's gone over and experienced it, or through their own time that they've spent with us in Uganda at a music festival or something they've seen and done. I think that if you're interested in women's empowerment, I think the women who have come to women's leadership summits have been really excited about the fact that they had a seat at the table with women who they would never have an opportunity to have a seat at the table with. I think that people who go to the music festivals understand what happens when you have an impact that's really driven by the local community and really created by that. And so our donors tend to gravitate towards the shared experience that they have, and less so. We're not a great organization for donors who want to create or build something that's tangible. So we don't, it's always been a little bit more complicated because we're a research institute and we're community driven, we're community based. So we create jobs for Ugandans. It's hard to show those tangibly. It's easier to show something that you built. We don't really build things. And so we tend to gravitate or connect with the donors who are like, ooh, that's a really cool way to think about that. I hadn't thought about it that way. I would love my family to experience that. We don't do philanthropy tourism. We don't go and look at poor people. Any place that we work, we have long-standing relationships. So it becomes a more meaningful experience for the folks who participate in our programming.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. That's a unique question. I don't usually get asked about our donors.
Yeah, I really like that one. And I was actually curious, but we've got a couple of student entrepreneurs that are focused on sort of this nonprofit social impact space. Like I mentioned before, what sort of, and if maybe you can expand more on this, your donor relations strategy and how you actually go out and meet these new donors and engage them for the first time with GLI or the Emerson Collective, and tell that story to them.
Yeah, I think donors are folks who tend to, if you know one donor, you know one donor, and so I think it's one of those things where you have to kind of figure out how to connect them with the experience and what that looks like. I also think that the philanthropy is changing significantly right now. The days of selling a table or going to a chicken dinner or people writing checks just because it sounds like a cool idea. People want to see impact, and people are measuring impact differently. They're less interested. I reached out to 1,000 applicants. It's like, well, but what happened? We have 200 young women who are farming in northern Uganda based on a program that they helped us design. And they're increasing their incomes. We have 40 full-time staff right now that we've employed for over 6 years, and they don't come to us and ask us to pay their school fees or to pay their healthcare bills because they're paying those things on their own. So how do you measure impact? And I think donors tend to gravitate, anybody wants to know that their dollars are being spent well. They don't want to think that they've given a bunch of money to something that's not working or is not having a lasting impact. So I think the more you can show that, and for us, we have to work a little bit harder to do that. You have to show that through what does it mean to engage a woman in the Women's Leadership Summit? How do you measure the impact that has by her ability to connect and build networks and to access people that some of us get to access all the time, and we don't think about it because we get invited to things that a lot of folks don't get invited to. And so how do we create those seats at the table and then show donors the impact? So we're constantly thinking about that. But, I also believe in the whole notion that if you do the work, the money will come. It doesn't take, you all know it. And when you hear a professor speak or somebody who's giving a lecture, if they genuinely understand or care about the issue, it doesn't take very long. And donors know it too. It doesn't take long for a donor to look at an organization to figure out whether or not the wheels are on and what that looks like. And so I think that how you build those, and I think on the social entrepreneurship side of things, the emphasis is on you all as you think about building businesses. How are you going to create jobs? And not just, you can go, one of the things I harp about all the time is these social impact companies are like, oh, we're a social impact company. We created 1,000 jobs. Well, just because you create 1,000 jobs doesn't make you a social impact company. If the people who are working those jobs are just as poor as they were a year later, that's not a social impact. How do you create meaningful jobs that are going to allow people to care for their families and improve their quality of life? That's a social impact. How do you create jobs that are going to improve the quality of health and the quality of life in the communities where they live? That's a social impact. But just because you create an output, a job, doesn't mean that that's a social impact. It's how do you measure those things and think about those things as you're doing them. So,
got it. Well, you definitely scratched the surface on this one a little bit, but another attendee asked, how does GLI measure their impact?
We measure it in a lot of different ways. We're looking at the quality of jobs that we're creating. I'm very interested to look at these 200 women that we're working with up in the north and what's going to happen to their incomes over the next couple of years. We're just starting to get into outside of our pilot phase, where one of the things that they taught us was they really needed help with food storage. So right before COVID hit, we actually had a group of students from the School of Mines who wanted to do an engineering project. We needed their help to think through food storage. So they've been helping us think that piece through. So we measured through that. We're doing a lot around public health. So we have, again, one of the largest music festivals, but it's also very rooted in HIV intervention. And again, you can give 1,000 HIV tests. I'm not that interested if you gave 1,000 HIV tests. How many tested positive? And we know that from our last round, we had about 200 positives. And are they in treatment? And 100% of our positives are in treatment right now. So that's a good outcome. So those are ways that we'll look at measuring outcomes. We also do it by stories. They're not as quantitative, and they're not going to show you the same. Our music festival has a $1.2 million economic impact on the communities. That's a compelling number, but the woman who, or the employee that we have who has been working with us for 5 years, who just finished building the second part of his house, and can now house his family and receive no gifts from us. He just used his money that he earned to go and build the house because he has a job. That's a good story too. And so how do we make sure we're telling stories and quantifying our impact, both through the storytelling that we do, but also through the way that we measure our outcomes. And so if you read our annual report, you should get a flavor for both. But measuring impact is hard to do, and I think that it merits a lot of attention so that you can communicate to different donors.
Yeah, well, thank you. And then we've got another question from Fatima. How has GLI been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic? How have they pivoted, and how are you planning to move forward during the recovery phase?
Great. And I have a question for Fatima. I wonder if this is the Fatima that I know from the University of Denver. So I'll find out later, but I know a Fatima from the University of Denver. But
oh, she said yes. She said yes.
Oh, thank you. See, she's gonna throw me a good question so I can answer this. I'm actually really excited about it. I think that the COVID crisis, when I look at the COVID crisis, I want to talk a little bit about how Uganda has been impacted by it. As of this morning, both Uganda and Rwanda have, I think, fewer, and don't quote me because I don't have the exact numbers, but I just looked at it this morning. I think it's under 300 number of cases in Rwanda and less than 300 cases in Uganda. There's been 0 deaths from COVID in either one of those countries. And I think the tendency, one of the things that's most discouraging to me or most frustrating to me is whenever there's an Ebola outbreak, people are like, oh, you shouldn't go to Africa. And people do that without actually really understanding even where it is or how is it impacting it. You know, when the Ebola crisis was hitting Western Africa, that was in Liberia, and people are telling us that, wondering if they should come to Rwanda. It's a little bit like asking whether or not you should go to Washington State in the Pacific Northwest when there's a hurricane hitting Miami. It's like, I don't know how that's going to impact Washington State. But we make these unbelievable, bold assumptions about things. And the other thing that's interesting is we never give Africa enough credit. We always kind of blame them when things go wrong, but we don't ever talk about the things that we learned from Africa. There's something to be said about the fact that 3 months into the coronavirus pandemic, that you have 2 countries right now that have literally have 0 deaths. And again, I would ascribe that somewhat to the mild dictatorships there. So I'm not celebrating the lack of democracy that I think we see in some of the African countries. But I do think that there's very little mention of the fact that Uganda has one of the best disease containment units on the planet, and is actually one of the reasons why Ebola, when there is an outbreak, that they're able to contain it so quickly, and why it hasn't spread from the Congo into Uganda, because of the enormous amount of work and thought that goes in from local doctors and healthcare providers. And so I have a philanthropist friend who reminds me that we don't take pictures of planes landing safely. We don't tend to talk about Uganda and Rwanda when they're like, hey, you know, the United States is having a really rough go of this, and there's African countries that aren't. They lock down and they're figuring out how to contain it, and it might be worth us paying a little bit more attention and seeing what it is that they're doing, and if there's anything that we can learn from them.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Any more questions from anybody else in the audience?
Great questions, everybody.
Yeah, Jamie, you always, the last few times you've told a very funny story, and I'm curious if you feel like sharing it again, but the slumber party fundraiser that you did, or the pajama fundraiser that you did, can you share the story of that again?
Oh, on homelessness?
Pardon?
Sure. The one that we did for the homeless?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this. It's a great segue for the question around donors and how do you engage. And we don't always gravitate to the ideas that are the most high impact, or the ones that are going to be the most successful. And so I remember when I first started working for the governor, or he was the mayor at the time, and I was running his homeless initiative, the first assignments I had was to go and Walter Eisenberg and Evan Mikowski, who own a bunch of hotels at a company called Sage Hospitality that's grown substantially over the years. They wanted to do a pajama party for the homeless and to raise money at one of their new hotels. And I thought that was the dumbest idea in the entire planet. That why on earth would anybody in the business community wear their pajamas to a cocktail party in Denver? I was like, the first event that I'm going to do for the mayor is going to be a ridiculous PJ party, and who's going to do that? I was a good loyal soldier. I did what I was told to do, and we put it all together. And that night, Walter Eisenberg and the mayor and Evan McCuskey showed up in their ridiculous pajamas. The mayor wore a pair of red pajamas that his mother made him, and the community showed up. We raised $60,000 that night, and we had a martini luge, and people had some drinks, and we're reminded that not everybody gets to wear pajamas when they go to bed at night. And the second year, that pajama party made $120,000. And the following year, it made $250,000. And during our economic recession, the last major economic recession we had until now, in 2008, when everybody said, oh, it's never going to make any money now, nobody's going to support this with all the economic crisis, it made over $500,000. And it was that reminder, again, I mean, back in the day, I wouldn't have articulated it this well. But it was me wanting to act without listening and thinking. And there's some folks who are like, well, you should give this a little bit of thought and see how we put this together. And it ended up being something that ended up being a very high impact. And as a reminder that some of your ideas that you have in social entrepreneurship might seem a little bit wacky and might seem a little bit off center. And some of those ideas tend to be the ones that are the most successful. So, I really push our staff, because of things like that story that Scott reminds us about, to take those risks, like making sure that you're building not just your resume, but are you really building your resume of failures? Your resume of failures should be longer than your resume, because it means that you're trying different things, and they're not all supposed to work. You actually you don't want something to fail, but you want to learn from that because it'll make you better at what you do. So anyway, thanks for that, Scott.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. One, Martini Luge just rose to the top of my Christmas list this year.
There you go. We'll work on that, Scott.
But second, I think it shows that sort of in this sort of seemingly saturated sort of nonprofit and social impact world, that really being different and being innovative stands out. And I think you've proven that with GLI and Emerson. And I think that the student companies that are coming out of DU that are focusing on these exact types of initiatives will embody that as well. And so just to sort of start wrapping this up a little bit, guys, I really recommend watching the video that we'll send out. Jamie, if you don't mind dropping that URL in the chat so people can have it. I know we also emailed it to you all before the meeting. I really encourage you to watch the video. It's really cool to see the work that's being done and the people that it's impacting. And then secondly, we've been recording this webinar, and we'll be sharing this on Project Excite's website and YouTube page in the coming days. But it was really great to sort of see all you guys involved in this and asking questions. And Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time to participate and be a part of this.
Great. Well, Scott, thank you for having me. I'm always delighted. And then, Scott, I'll send a follow-up email with my contact information and with a little bit of information about the Global Fellowship Program that we've launched in case folks are looking for internship opportunities this summer or ways to engage. And then we'll go from there. And so thank you all for a great conversation. I look forward to. And Fatima, thank you for a great question. It's always good to hear from students that I feel very loyal to and who have experienced the communities that we've been a part of. So have a great rest of your week and take care, guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks.